Today, I am going to preach in a manner that I have never preached before. 5 pithy stories with an escalating consequence, and then a sustained time in the text, followed by why this all matters. You okay with that? Because if you're not, that's the way I'm going anyway, but no. All right, get ready. Okay. You don't know what you don't know, right? That's a true statement, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. In fact, the Apostle Paul, I think, echoes that in his own language in a different context. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. Tools are not my thing. They just aren't. I'm not a mechanical guy. You see, I have a brother who's 15 months older than I am, and he's become an engineer. And even back in the day, it was obvious that he had that bent and that ability. And my father, who also came from that background, why train a new guy when you can get the guy who knows what he's doing, right? So I just never had that going on, and I've acquired tools through the years. You can't live or be a homeowner or whatever and not do that, but I've never really quite used the right names. So like this here, this would be one of those pinchy squeezer things, right? I think some of you might call it a needle nose pliers or maybe a long nose plier, but that's what that is. And this here is that clampy grabber, right? Which I think it's a torque wrench, if I'm not mistaken. And then this here is the bubble bar, right? I mean, it's a level, but a bubble bar, that works because of the bubble and so forth. And this, by the way, if you didn't know, this is great for toenails. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, you don't know what you don't know. Now, it may be pathetic, but this is pretty harmless. Would you agree with me? All right. The next one. So I was a model maker when I was a boy. And mostly I did commercial airplanes. I did military helicopters. My father had an aviation background. That was my bent. But one time I decided to do another model which had to do with the raising of the flag in Iwo Jima. My father asked me what I was doing. I didn't have any conversation with him before I bought the model. But I told him that this was a model that I was doing of these sort of 6 comical guys who were trying to put the flag up like it was a comedy or something. And I remember that my dad, who was the only child and had an uncle who was more like a brother to him, who was lost in World War II, was killed in the Battle of the Bulge. Actually, there's a vignette featured in the movie Patton, which is about him. I could just see my dad's ashen face. He didn't jump all over me, but he began to tell me the history of what this was all about. 5 days into the Battle of Iwo Jima and how brutal it was, and this was a way of staking the claim on that hill or mount. You don't know what you don't know. Perhaps insensitive, definitely ignorant. Well, in the younger years of Leanne and my marriage, I was helping out her dad and her brother one time. They were cutting down some large trees that were all along the edge of the road, the main road that they lived on, and they had an open field, but these trees had gotten overgrown, so they wanted to drop the trees and cut them down. And given the fact that even then I had a fair amount of girth and inability, they decided that I could hold the rope and pull it, okay? And they basically told me that when the tree would break or the tree would start to go, run out from under it or walk out from under it. Made sense to me. So I'm pulling on that thing, and when it starts to come, man, I hauled off as fast as I could. I mean, you think I can get this body going, let me tell you. And sure enough, just as I got to the certain point, whoosh, I could feel the branches on the back of my feet. Well, I turned around, and they were standing over there just laughing. Because run from under the tree didn't mean try to outrun the tree. It meant step toward the trunk and watch it go by you. You don't know what you don't know, right? In that instance, it could have been very harmful. I could have gotten very badly hurt, or I could have actually died. I believe there's a Hebrew phrase for this. If you were to look it up and get the translation, that phrase basically says, you can't fix stupid. That would be me. Well, I grew up in a home where we had an in-ground pool in the backyard, and you've already ascertained from other times that I'm a rather peculiar guy, so I was all alone that afternoon, and I decided to practice something that not everybody does, but I thought I would do it, and that was that I would learn how to float on the bottom of the pool, motionless, and I got pretty good at it. My dad came home from work. I will never forget, I cannot unhear the tone of his voice as he called my name. Many years later, I asked him if he remembered, or I asked him about that, and he said he had no recollection of it. I had recollection of it. You don't know what you don't know. And that day, I learned that our little words and our little actions can have big consequences, extreme consequences. Well, here's a hill in Lithuania. Are any of you familiar with it, the Hill of Crosses? It's a beautiful place. It's a confusing place. It's a strange place. All these crosses, they don't really know when people began to place them and then later erect the bigger ones. They think, actually, the first documentable historical occasion probably is 1831. Lithuania was controlled by Russia, and there was an uprising trying to overthrow that control, and they lost, the Lithuanians, and a lot of lives were lost, and many of the bodies they couldn't find. So people, in an effort to memorialize their loved one and to have a tidy way of remembrance, they put these crosses. At least that's the historical evidence, and then that tradition just grew and grew and grew through the years. Until finally, in 2006, is the last documented counting that I could find, they had over 100,000 of these crosses of one kind or another there, and it has to have grown since then. Well, here's the thing that is curious and strange about church and about Jesus' followers, that sometimes we do curious things, and we do strange things, and we do hurtful things. So I'm most cognizant, as a person who gives pastoral care, of when people explain to a child death, but they do it in a very sloppy way. They usually do it to memorialize, and it's a tidy way, and it's a way that they put a happy emotion connected to it. So when you tell an 8-year-old boy who lost his dad that God needed him more than we do, you've done violence to that child, because now you'll wonder why that child hates God, never wants to be in God's presence. It has nothing to do with God. Or you tell a kid who's little that an angel in the night took Uncle Bob, who is 6'4" and 240 pounds. And the kid develops a sleeping disorder, and you wonder why. Because you've done theological violence, biblical malpractice. You don't know what you don't know, but sometimes you need to know. You really do. So the context for this text that I read from Paul begins this way. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, that's the part I read before, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So the context that Paul gives for that, sometimes you just don't know, is basically that we grow and that we need to grow. That growth is a part of the Christian life, the Christ follower life. In fact, John Maxwell, who himself, a leadership guru, is getting older in his years of age, said that what matters more than your years of age is how much you've grown. Are you growing? And our lead pastor, Creighton, has told us many times in recent weeks, are you stagnant? Are you stale? Or are you growing in your relationship with Jesus? So growth becomes a very important thing to correcting you don't know what you don't know. And all of us get to crossroads. All of us get to intersections. All of us get to places where life demands that you grow and you grow up. The question is going to be, what is the learning that will do the trick? What is the learning that will transform you? And Pastor Creighton has cautioned us many times in the past about the difference between information and transformation. And there is a difference, and we're shooting for the transformation in following Jesus. Now, the way the church more often than not corrects the issues are when you're at the demands of an intersection and you have to grow up, is that we get all teachy. We just pour on the teaching. That's our go-to. That's our wheelhouse. And oftentimes it becomes dogmatic or doctrinaire. In fact, I remember a famous preacher, and he said that there's no problem that people face that you can't teach your way out of it. Now, it was a fanciful notion, and I was drawn to it, but is that true? How is it that you move from information to transformation? Well, these two gentlemen are brothers. One is Chip Heath. He's the one on the left. The other one is Dan Heath. He's the one on the right. Chip is from California. He's a professor at Stanford University. He's in the business department. Dan had been at Harvard in the education department, but now he's at Duke, and he helps with entrepreneurship and some justice kind of things. But they have written a number of books, secular books, not Christian at all. They're some of my favorite of my secular books. But this one is called The Power of Moments. The Power of Moments. And what they are espousing, and this book fabulously outlines, is how it is experiences. I'm not just talking about experience of years. Experiences, pivotal experiences, defining moments that will change your life. These are the things that create the transformation that we're learning for. These are the things that grow us up, and I would dare say, grow us up in the image of God, that develop our discipleship, our following of Jesus. Which brings us to the text. This is the time of the year which we typically talk about post-resurrection appearances. It's the 40 days when Jesus appeared to the disciples and his followers, and he was in his resurrected form, and there's not always a consistency of how he looked or what their interaction was. But these are just fabulous stories before the ascension, before he went to heaven. And this one is a fascinating one. This is the walk to Emmaus, and it's captured in Luke's gospel. It's a favorite story for many of us. So I want to take our time, and I want us to really distill some of the truths of this. And then at the end, I want to kind of try to draw this all together, okay? So here's the beginning. Now that what? Same day. What same day was it? It's Easter. We're talking about Easter, but we're talking about later in the day. Two of them were going, and doesn't yet name the two, going to a village called Emmaus. Emmaus we cannot find archaeological evidence for. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. It seems very much that it did. There were lots of places with Emmaus in the name. Emmaus basically meant warm spring. It's thought that it was on the west bank of Jerusalem, or the west bank, of Israel. And it was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about what? Everything that happened. And that is exactly what happens to people when they experience trauma, is that you process it. You talk about it over and over again out loud. Unless you're a person that stuffs it, there are folks like that too. But most of us, we're just going to talk about everything that's happened to us. And so they're talking about everything that had happened that Holy Week. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and what? Walked along with them. This is when Jesus typically shows up in our lives. When we are about other things and we go, oh, that's the Lord there. Oftentimes, though, we don't see it until in the rearview mirror of our lives, but that is where Jesus has a way, the resurrected Jesus, of coming into our lives. But they were what? Kept from recognizing him. So we all have this, we're oblivious, we're just tunnel vision, we're dealing with life, dealing with our problems, and we don't realize that that's Jesus who's walking alongside of us. And he asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? So he's going to kind of bait them here a little bit. They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you what? The only one. Like, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and does not know the things that have happened there in these days? Karen and I were discussing this the other day. It just seems to be that I'm incensed. Do you have no idea what's going on? And the reality is, a lot of times when we're going through difficulties or trauma, that's exactly how we feel about God. Lord, do you have no idea what I'm dealing with here? Where are you? I mean, where were you? What's going on? So though they're voicing it to this stranger, in a way, I feel like we voice those things to God. And then what things Jesus asked? About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped what? We'd hoped he was the one. Things didn't go according to script. Things didn't go, after that Palm Sunday parade the way we expected. This gets the better of most of us, if not many of us. Things didn't go the way I expected. I'll never forget, because it broke my heart a time that my son, when it came to a faith experience, looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, "Dad, it just didn't happen for me." In other words, he was feeling the disappointment with God, and that something that he had thought God would do, God didn't do, and it sort of derailed his faith. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you that that has persisted even to this day in various ways. So this is an issue that we all face. We thought that he would be the one who was going to do what? Redeem Israel. That redemption was going to come, not just for Israel, but certainly for Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all of this took place. And in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but what? Didn't find the body. Now that is quite shocking, because let's not forget that there was this huge stone that, while there was a groove that it oftentimes rolled in, that thing was massive. And then, because of the worry of these disciples would tamper with the body and start some kind of, rumor and conspiracy and so forth, it was being guarded by soldiers. And then it also had the Roman seal, which is this whole contraption as well, so that it remains unbroken. So this is a pretty much shocking thing. And they came and they told us what they had seen. A vision of angels who said what? He was alive. But sometimes words for each and every one of us are not enough. Words are not enough to convince. Words do not get down into the depths of our soul, and that's where we find them. Then some of our companions went to the tomb, and they found it just as the women had said. But what? They did not see Jesus. So they continue to be stuck. They continue to be lingering. Just, they're getting the words. The body's not there. It's kind of what he said, alluded to, but they're not believing. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he what? Explained to them what he had said in all the scriptures concerning himself. So you do get the sense now that he's moving the needle, that they're listening, that they're engaged, but they're still at a point where the teaching alone is not sufficient. Something needs to activate that teaching. Something needs to bring it to life, so it's not just words or words on a page and so forth. And as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued as if he was going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us. There's something happening in this community, this exchange. For it's nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And when he was what? At the table with them, and he took bread, he gave thanks and he broke it, and he began to give it to them. What is this reminiscent of? The Last Supper. And then what happened? Their eyes opened. Their eyes opened and they recognized him. So they have had a powerful experience that has activated, and it says he disappeared then from their sight. And they asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning?" This isn't indigestion. This is a different kind of heartburn within us while he talked with us on the road and he opened the scriptures to us. So this experience activated what he had been teaching them. So much so that they were remembering. It was living. It had taken on a new life within them. And so they got up and they returned at once to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those assembled together saying what? It's true. So now, not only has it been activated, but they are compelled and, in fact, impelled. So they're compelled in the sense that they have conviction, but they're impelled to go out and tell others what has happened. And they're saying it's true. The Lord, what? Has risen and has appeared to Simon. Then, they knew that news before, but now it means something. They've had this experience that is activated. They've had this burning heart thing going on. And then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. He broke the bread. A powerful experience to activate their faith and to make it burn strong in their hearts. So over the last number of weeks, and it will continue for one more week, at Student Life, we have been having testimonies of the resurrection, the power of testimony. And we've had people give firsthand accounts of the living Jesus changing their lives. And each of them have had very different stories. Now, why have we done that rather than just doing a history lesson or just exclusively a Bible study? We've had Bible, but why haven't we just done that, preparing us for Easter and then now celebrating Easter? Why this? Because these individuals come and they have had an experience of Jesus. And they speak with a level of conviction. They speak impelled to share that goodness with others. And I kid you not, there are different things that each kid connects with the different speakers based on their life story and what God has done. But that stuff, you talk about our hearts burning with life. What's happened is that they get to touch that experience of somebody else that ignites and sets ablaze their faith. And in the same way that Jesus broke the bread, and that's kind of the moment that, the light bulb went on. So each one of these have had something. This gentleman to the left had a Ugandan coin that for various reasons that he told the story, he happened to come across it. It was a weird thing. It was God speaking to him. The person in the middle talked about a locked door and not being able to get in and what that kind of made the scales come from her eyes and suddenly realized her predicament and she'd gone the wrong direction. And this other person talked about camp and talked about her boyfriend's deployment as how God seized their attention, broke the bread, gave them the experience. Experience is huge. So I usually use this around Christmas time. It is a book that tells you how to spend your money well so that you'll be happy spending your money. It basically says if you want to give somebody a gift that will last, that will make an impact, you want to give them an experience. You don't want to buy them stuff. You want to give them something that will sear in their memory and they will have that heart-burning experience. Now, we talk about that around here all the time. It's in our mantra. It's in our mission statement. We do what? Encounter God. We don't just teach about God. We encounter God, and we live transformed. Now, I'm just going to be honest. This is not because he's not here, but we have one of the best academic pastors I have ever worked with, both an academic but also a pastor's heart. And the kind of stuff that he distills and processes so that it's not like you can blow the dust off of it, but it's like, wow, I had no idea. As good as it gets, in my opinion. And yet even he will say this is far more important. Encounter God, experience God, and you will live transformed. What we're talking about are defining moments. That's what the Heath brothers refer to it as. Defining moments are pivot moments. Defining moments are defining moments. Defining moments are transformational moments where what you experience not only moves the needle, but you exit that experience kind of a different person. And this is what Dan and Chip Heath say in their quote. We feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not. What? Experiences can change your life. And that's absolutely true. And so they detail for us that I think it comes from their research just there about humanity and academics, but also I think it speaks to the experience on the road to Emmaus. But they talk about 4 different steps. that create a defining moment. One in these words, and at first I was put off by one of the words, elevation, insight, pride, which tends to be a church thing you don't admit to, and connection. But what they mean by these four things are this. Next slide. Elevation is when you experience something that is more than just transient. It's more than just the moment. It goes beyond that. There's something bigger. There's something grander that's at play. It tends to be an insight that you get that you're rewired, like I had with my behavior or my words or different things that I shared in the vignettes and stories. Or pride, that it has a way of capturing you at your best or bringing out, calling out your best. That's what transformational experiences will do. And there are usually a connection, that they are usually happening in a social context. Now, we believe that because we believe in the body of Christ. But this is really just speaking in general terms, in any terms. That's where these experiences tend to happen. And so, what they said, once again, is, were not our hearts burning within us when he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? We're talking about a different kind of heartburn. We're talking about a heartburn, a learning, a growing that is experiential. So back in the day, when I was really at the beginning of my career and I was doing youth ministry, and Group Magazine was the premier resource, and they planned lots of events for youth groups. And I remember taking a slew of kids, 20-some, to one of their conventions. And the speaker did something that was really kind of weird. He was talking about the feeding of the 5,000, the loaves and fishes and so forth. He's just telling the story. And all he's got in his hand is a donut. And then he starts passing it around without really instructions. But the first person took a little piece off, and the next person took a little piece off, and the next person took a little piece off, until it circulated through that whole room. Everybody had a piece. Now, it was weird. I'm not telling you that the feeding of the 5,000, that they weren't an actual feeding, because it says that there were baskets of food left over. I'm just saying that that moment drilled down that God does miraculous things, even when you don't get instruction. We just all followed suit, and we had this aha experience that God does miraculous things. Experience, God experience, is a different way of learning. It's not teaching. It's not doctrine. It's not being persuaded. That's not what it is. In fact, an ancient Chinese proverb says this: when I hear, I forget. When I see, I remember. And when I do, or when I experience, now I understand. So there are three layers to this, just as I close to the finish line. And these are huge right now in advertising, if you didn't know that. Experiential learning is this different way of learning where a person has an experience. They don't have something pounded into them. Experiential marketing is what they're trying to do to get you to buy the products and so forth. I mean, how is it that we have HD, high-definition TVs, and yet people still go to stadiums to see games? Why do they do that? Because of what they do in the concourses, all the fun that they have, all the experiences that they create in the first-person experience. This is experiential marketing. And then experiential activation is something that's just being talked about in the last few years, is that it's that experiential that activates people making a choice that will last a lifetime. And that happens even with Jesus. So here we are with this heartburn. What you don't know, you don't know. Until you do know. Until you do know, because it's not a learning of doctrine. It's not a learning of pounding somebody with teaching. It's a learning of an experience that happens in the midst of your road to Damascus, your road to, where was he going? Emmaus. Your everyday life, and Jesus shows up, and you recognize that it's Jesus. And you embrace Jesus. And now your life is different.